Hello and welcome to another episode from the Flying Reporter. Today I'm preparing to fly somewhere I've flown many times before. So does that mean I can just turn up here and go? Oh no, I have to give today's flight as much attention as if I was going somewhere completely new. Today we're going to explore my flight preparation process.
Hopefully all of us give our aeroplanes a thorough look over before starting the engine, ensuring there's enough oil, removing the chocks and tie downs, and checking that the aircraft documents are up to date. But experienced aviators know that preparing for a flight usually begins long before we've walked out to the aircraft.
Astral Aviation Consulting is working with the UK CAA to produce safety-related content for pilots like you and I. And they've sponsored this video because they want me to help raise awareness of how important pre-flight planning is. On a routine flight like the one I'm conducting today, I would usually begin looking at it at least a day in advance. So let's rewind now 14 hours to see what I was doing last night.
If your home is anything like ours, it's a busy place. My son Bertie wants feeding, there's laundry to sort out and life admin to deal with. But when it comes to flight planning, I always make sure I set aside time and find a quiet place so that I can concentrate on the task.
Now, if I'm planning a flight, a longer flight say, to a new destination, I might start looking at things up to a week in advance, sometimes even longer than that for complicated routes. But because tomorrow I'm flying a familiar route, a destination I've been to many times before, I've left it until now, about 24 hours before departing, to start work. Now the first thing I do before I do anything is look at the weather, and I'm constantly looking at the weather in the days leading up to my flying tasks. Because if the chances of flying are less than 50%, what's the point of putting all that effort in to the planning process? It would just be wasted time. Thankfully, looking at the charts here today for tomorrow's flight, we've got high pressure here, the weather looks good, I've checked the TAFs as well for tomorrow morning and they're all looking promising as well. So I'm going to dive into the task, but of course I won't go until I've checked the weather in great detail again tomorrow morning on the day of my flight.
I usually pull out the tablet, open up my moving map software and make sure the navigation data is current. I also check for updates on the AIP and download any aerodrome flight guide charts that may have been updated. Aeronautical data changes frequently and you don't want to be flying with inaccurate charts. Only once I've done this, I plot my intended route.
Now this is a relatively simple flight, just the 58 nautical miles up to Earl's Cone. And when I head out this way, I usually head out to the east from Red Hill. They'll route us via the Godstone VRP if the wind is as predicted for tomorrow. And then what I usually do is I aim for the Bow Beach Reservoir, and it's a really clear, obvious landmark that you can see from miles around. So it's a really good landmark for confirming that you are on course and making sure that you're not disoriented when you leave the circuit. But the other good thing about Bow Beach Reservoir is it's right at the edge here of the Gatwick CTA. Now I know that up until that reservoir I've got to remain at or below 1400 feet if I don't have a clearance to go into the Gatwick CTA. I also know that once I've reached the reservoir, that's the point at which I can consider climbing higher because I'm no longer in controlled airspace.
From the reservoir, I'm going to fly to the QE2 bridge. It's where the M25 crosses the River Thames. I'll then route on to the southern side of Chelmsford and then direct to Earl's Cone. If for any reason I can't land at Earl's Cone, my diversion aerodrome will be Biggin Hill. It was going to be Southend, but I've had a look at the NOTAMs already and Southend is closed tomorrow.
Now I don't just stick in my route here and marvel at my clean magenta lines that I've drawn on my digital chart. Because in my experience, when preparing for a flight on a tablet, as opposed to plotting a route on a chart with a ruler and a pen, it's easier for me to overlook some of the smaller hazards. Now these apps are really good because they will pop up warnings from time to time. There's even a warnings tab that you can review before you finalise your route to see if there were any hazards along your route, but I've missed them in the past. So as a matter of habit, what I do now is I zoom right in and I go from start to finish of my flight, centimetre by centimetre, inspecting every small section of the route, and I'm looking out for those small hazards like gas venting sites, high intensity radio transmission areas, those smaller danger areas that we sometimes can't quite see when we're zoomed out, or even gliding sites. Another gotcha with these apps is another feature that's actually quite beneficial, but you need to know how to use them, and these are decluttering options or weekend view. As I say, learn how to use them, read the manuals, because there is a danger if you don't know how to use them properly that you could declutter out some feature or airspace that you really need to know about. A classic example would be you've decluttered your map to hide everything above 5,000 feet. Well, when you're sitting here on the ground, that's all hidden and all well and good, and you plan your route and you climb to 8,000 feet, and there's that airspace that you had decluttered when you were doing your planning. So as I say, make sure you learn how to use these apps. They are great and they're powerful and they're really useful time-saving devices, but there are some little gotchas that you need to know about.
Now that I'm happy with my route, I'll start filling out a plog and often mark the route on my half-mil paper chart as well. I'm sometimes laughed at for still using a paper plog and carrying a paper chart, but I think they're a really good idea. If the battery dies on the tablet, I've got a backup. Of course, a second tablet or mobile phone might serve that same purpose. While filling out the plog, I'm noting the highest I can fly without a clearance on each leg, and I'm also working out my minimum safe altitudes.
Now these days I do rely on my navigation software to help me with this process because it's updated with the very latest aeronautical information and obstacle data. But if you are going to use your navigation software to help you calculate the minimum safe altitudes, then make sure that you have it set up correctly, because the default settings may not give you the correct altitudes for your flight.
Your MSA will vary by flight rules and proximity to congested areas such as towns and cities. You may have to do this manually. Also, do double check all the app settings after a software or operating system update. Mine has sometimes reverted to its default values.
Now that the minimum safe altitudes have been entered on my plog, I'm going to review the aerodrome charts for my point of departure, destination and alternatives. And then I'm going to populate a list of frequencies that I might need and navigation aids that I might use as well.
That's pretty much all I can do this evening, and so I wrap up and make sure I get a good night's sleep.
Well, good morning. It's around about 6:30 in the morning now, and I'm feeling fine and dandy, excited for my flight up to Earl's Cone today. And actually, do you know what? How you're feeling is a really important part of the pre-flight planning process, and it's easy to overlook the human factors when doing all of these technical and mathematical things that we have to do to prepare for our flight. So I've recently started using the well-known checklist, I'm safe. I stands for illness. Am I suffering any illness or pains and aches that could impair my ability to fly today? M for medication, and am I on any strong painkillers that might give me blurred vision or would prevent me from flying or driving, for example? S, stress. No, I'm not suffering from any stress, work troubles or money troubles today. A, alcohol. I didn't have any alcohol last night, so I'm sober and fit to fly. F for fatigue. I had a good night's sleep, good 8 hours in fact last night, so I'm feeling well rested. And finally, E stands for emotion. Am I emotionally stable? Yes, I am. I am right now at least. But we need to keep this under review. Maybe on the drive to the airport we might witness a nasty accident, or some inconsiderate driver might have cut me up and I got stressed and angry about it. And if something like that might happen, we might need to take an hour's break, a cup of tea, to cool down. While we're on the subjects of checklists, I wanted to introduce this checklist which I have produced with the help of Astral Aviation Consulting, and it goes through all the steps that you might expect to have to go through prior to going on a flight. And let's be honest, you wouldn't be human if occasionally you forgot one of the important steps that you are supposed to do prior to flying. There's so many things to think about now, aren't there? PPR, weight and balance, fuel calculations, online this, online that, check this website for that. Yeah, it can get quite a bit of a minefield. So this checklist will help you remember some of those key points. It's free to download. You can download it from a link in the top right hand corner of your screen now here on YouTube, or you can wait until this video has ended and there'll be a link in the video description as well.
The weather for today's flight is fairly reasonable as predicted. The charts, TAFs and METARs for my point of departure, destination and alternative are VMC all day. I use the forecast temperatures and pressures to calculate my takeoff and landing distances at each of the airports I'm visiting, taking account of my weight and balance, which I've also worked out. For NOTAMs, do check that you're using an official source and take time to look carefully at the NOTAM detail. Sometimes restricted airspace can be incorrectly programmed.
I can now populate the plog that I started to prepare yesterday with my wind corrected headings, ground speeds and time for each leg. If you're going to use your moving map software to calculate this for you, don't forget to connect it to the internet to make sure it downloads the latest data. I've made the mistake more than once of not doing this and then realizing that all my timings and headings don't work out because the forecast weather yesterday is different from today. On a long flight, that can make the difference between whether or not you've got enough fuel or not. So it is a very, very important step to remember. And while we're on the subject of fuel, obviously I'm going to calculate the amount of fuel that I need for the route. For my diversion, I'm going to need a reserve. I'm legally required to have a reserve fuel. For VFR by day, that needs to be 30 minutes fuel at least. I usually go for the VFR at night or IFR minima of 45 minutes because I like to err on the side of caution. And sometimes I might take more reserve fuel than that if the weather is somewhat marginal. Don't be afraid of loading more fuel than you actually need. And then I'm going to use a contingency figure of adding 5% on top of all of that.
In the winter, I'm going to pay close attention to the freezing level and the sunset times. Both can easily catch you out if you're not careful.
We're nearly done here and I'll be heading off to the airport any moment now. But before I go, there is one last thing that I have started doing, and that's revising one item from my aeroplane's emergency checklist. Because over the course of time, I will gradually remember all of these items, or at least keep them reasonably fresh in my memory. And the emergency procedure that I'm going to remind myself of today, for my aeroplane, this may differ with yours, this is for an engine fire during startup: starter, crank engine, mixture, idle cutoff, throttle open, primer off, fuel selector off, and evacuate if the fire continues. So a good tip there. Perhaps you could do the same, revising just one item from your emergency checklist every flight.
The M25 was predictably slow going, but I've built in some time in my schedule for delays like this, and so I'm not too fussed. I usually arrive at the airfield about an hour to an hour and a half before I depart. This gives me plenty of time to set up my cameras as well as prepare the aeroplane thoroughly. Of course, before I leave, I always make one last check of the weather for any updates and also review the NOTAMs one last time in case of any changes.
I do hope you found this video useful, and please go and download that pre-flight preparation checklist that I've devised with the support of Astral Aviation Consulting. And there are lots of great safety resources on their website. The link is on your screen now. I'm going to proceed now with the final checks for my flight up to Earl's Cone, and you can see how I get on in part 2 of this video, and that's available to stream right now. Thank you for watching. Fly safely, my friends.